Well, I guess we'll get started and welcome everyone watching us online. I'd like to call to order this Planning and Development Committee for November the 16th. And the first order of business is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility to do so. You do now or when it arises. We have none. Then this morning we have one public meeting. It is Bruce County Official Plan Amendment number 227-17.01, care of the Fishers. We'll have the planning report. Then we'll have questions from the committee of the report, if there is any, and then if anyone from the public would like to speak to this, we will entertain any comments to this application. So I'll turn it over to our planner and hear the report.
Good morning, Council. The application before you is a Bruce County Official Plan Amendment made by Charles and Ken Fisher. It is the east half lot of Lot 10 and west part lot of Lot 10, Concession 13, or 1597 Highway 9. Just to get your bearings, Bernie McGlynn's lumber was severed off the corner. So if you know where that is, that's where we're talking about. The applicant proposes to complete a surplus farm dwelling severance and sever off a 0.8 hectare or 1.97 acre parcel containing the existing residence, detached garage, and a pond. The retained 42.27 acres will be merged with the adjacent 38.85 acres for a total retained farm parcel of 81 acres. Currently, the property is designated agricultural area with hazard land area, and our proposed amendment is agricultural area with exceptions to recognize that the farm parcel will be deficient in lot area and to recognize the number of times the original crown has been severed. An overall reduction and reconfiguration of the hazard land area as recommended by the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority. The application was circulated to the mandated agencies. No comments were received from South Bruce, including the clerk, operations manager, fire chief, and chief building official. The Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority did have some comments with regards to the Otter Creek provincially significant wetland that is on the north corner of the subject lands. They did not feel that an EIS or an environmental impact study was required for this application, being that the severed parcel is well outside of that provincially significant wetland. They also recommend that our hazard land area, being the county designation, be overall reduced to match the current zoning bylaw that has been included in this amendment. Historic Saugeen Métis had no comments or opposition. Hydro One had no comments. And at the time of writing this report, no comments have been received from the public. I did receive one late comment from the MTO. They did not have any concerns with this application. Matters arising from provincial interest. Lot creation in prime agricultural areas is discouraged and may only be permitted for agricultural uses, provided the lots are of a sufficient size and type of agricultural uses in the area, and a residence to a surplus farming operation. The PPS also directs that archaeological resources will be protected. A significant portion of the property is located within 300 meters of a waterway, being Otter Creek. So we have recommended that the lands that exhibit high potential be placed under an H holding as part of the zoning bylaw. The county official plan has a couple areas of interest in this application. The provincially significant wetlands do have several things that we're looking at when we approve application. We're looking to overall not a loss of wetland function, subsequent demand for future development which will negatively impact the wetland function, conflict with site-specific wetland management practice, and loss of wetland areas. The adjacent lands are considered to be within 120 meters of the individual wetland, and this proposal is 180 meters, so we are outside of those wetlands and adjacent areas. The zoning bylaw is tentatively scheduled to go before the Municipality of South Bruce Council on November 28th, 2017. There is a possible appeal to the Ontario Municipal Board, but other than that, we do feel that this represents good land use planning and should be approved.
Thank you, Dina. Is any member of the committee got any questions on the planning report? I see none. Then is there anyone from the public would like to speak to this application? See none there. Then we have a recommendation. And as soon as I find it, I'll read it. The recommendation is that Bruce County Official Plan Amendment number 227-17.01 be approved. Moved by Mitch, seconded by Robert. Any further discussion? All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
So the next item on the agenda then is an action item. It's for Esri Canada Community Maps, vector-based maps. And our Director, Chris, is going to present the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For quite a number of years, we've had an agreement with Esri Canada, not only for software, but they've also developed a web tool that publishes maps. And the purpose of the map publishing is to allow other developers working privately, trying to produce map products, do utility locates and so on, to be able to access maps. And this is a global and worldwide site. So it's been a good mechanism for us, although we don't technically have an open data type policy in place at this point in time within the county. It is a very good mechanism for us to share our layers as well as other partners so they can be used for other people. The principle for the sharing, I think from my perspective, is the maps have been sort of bought and paid for through the county taxpayers, and this is a great opportunity to get them up so people can use them. The layers that we're providing are the ones that we own or maintain, so nothing that is confidential information in terms of impact information and so on would be shared. Within the report, there's a list of the layers that we're providing, and there's a recommendation that the director be authorized to enter into the agreement with Esri for the Community Maps program.
So we have a recommendation. I'll get it on the floor and see if there's any discussion. The recommendation is that the Planning Department and that the Planning and Development Committee authorize the Director of Planning and Development to to sign the Esri Canada Community Maps Program Data Sharing Agreement. Moved by David, seconded by Ann. Any discussion? All in favor? That's carried. So the next item on the agenda is, again, it's an action item, and it has to do with change in conditions in, it's a Cassidy B, it's an 1-17.34, and I believe Bruce is going to present the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The application is for a change of conditions. I'd like to provide a little background on this file. There was an application made by Mr. Cassidy for a lot addition to a surplus farm dwelling lot. The original application was made in January of this year and came to council or came to committee in May of this year, at which time the committee made a decision in accordance with the recommendation given by planning staff. Since that time, the application was appealed by Mr. Cassidy to the Ontario Municipal Board, and following some discussions with the board and so on, it became clear that the board was not willing to offer mediation on the file, which had been requested. And so subsequently, Mr. Cassidy has withdrawn his appeal and submitted a change of conditions to address his wishes. So the application is before you. It involves essentially, I guess to recap, the area highlighted in yellow on the screen there, in the picture on the screen, is what was previously approved in May, and that was following the recommendation of planning staff. The Cassidys, in fact, wanted to include the area bounded in red, the red dashed line, as well to make the property more suitable for their proposed use. The application now before you is to include the red area with the yellow area, so that the total land being added is roughly double to what was approved previously. The differences are in the area of 0.6 hectares or 1.4 acres that would be added, additional land that would be added. The recommendation from planning staff remains the same as our earlier recommendation in May. I'm not sure there's a lot more information that I can give. If you wish to ask questions, you can. The Cassidys, who is the applicant, and the O'Hagans, who are the owners of the property that the lot addition would be taken from, are present here today. They are the only parties that hold an interest in the application at this point in time, and I believe that Mr. Cassidy would like to speak to council if he has the opportunity, so I recommend that council pass a resolution to allow that to occur.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. This isn't a public meeting, so normally we would need a motion to allow the Cassidys to speak, and I'll ask for committee's approval for that. Moved by Ann, seconded by Milt. All in favor? That's carried. So is there anyone from Mr. Cassidy, I guess, or anyone from the public, I guess, would like to speak to this particular application?
Hi, I'm Marty Cassidy. I put the applicant in. I was under the impression this summer when Mr. Stickney called me that the county had already talked about this and had changed their mind. So that's how we came about to this situation. I have 3 cases here I would like to bring up of stuff that's within, I don't know, maybe 20 miles of here that's been approved of bigger parcels. One was a Tony Lang and one was a Cantor's. They were both 5 acres in size that were approved. I believe one was actually more than 5 acres. And I have another one here. It's a Moz Ackert, or Ernie Ackert. And they put in for a bigger one, and it was turned down by the county or council or whoever. And now they've had to reapply because they need a septic system, and they don't have enough land for it, so sometimes all these smaller parcels aren't really working out. And if everybody could look in that picture right there, it shows a tractor, excuse me, trying to turn around. And you can see the little red section that he wants to leave with 150 acres wouldn't even be enough room for equipment to turn around. That's just a small tractor with a cultivator. The sprayer that would be going in there is about 125 feet, so it would have to back in twice just to cover the land, the little bit of land that would be left over.
And we just wanted to make note that the land that we're asking for, the bigger parcel, has been leased to us for the past multiple years, and it is used for pasture for horses. So it hasn't even been farmed agriculture because of the geographic area and for the tractor, for the farming purposes.
Thank you. Any questions from committee on Councillor Buckle?
So the land to the right-hand side, that's going to be severed off. Now, on the top part, that next chunk, or that next farm, that isn't all owned by the same person, is it? That's a different owner?
The red line there is the property line. That little
Yes.
section you see there is the next farm, yes.
Well, okay, so that next farm on the top of that is owned by somebody else?
Somebody else,
Okay,
yes.
I just wanted to make sure that that wasn't all
That
owned by
red
the
line
same
would be
farm.
the property line of the 150 acre farm that we're
Right.
trying to sever this little piece off of.
But it is a different owner?
Yes.
Yeah, very well.
Yeah.
Councillor Ingles?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to vote for this application. I think this is just an opportunity where we square up some property that really isn't good agricultural land. It's not going to be tilled, property won't be cropped. It's a pasture opportunity for these folks, and I think it makes a lot of sense. I mentioned that as well when we were talking about this back in May, we talked about going to the OMB or possibly. So I'm in favor of this application, and I think it just makes a lot of sense in our rural areas to expand some of these situations, and a little bigger than normal, but it's not going to have an impact on agriculture in Brockton at all.
Thank you, Dave. Any other comments from the committee? Councillor Eagleson.
What's the area where those blue arrows are and is squared off there? Is that another set of farm buildings owned by someone else, or?
That's currently my house, and I am trying to buy this land around it. So the little, where the blue arrows are pointing, that's pointing to my house.
That's the original severance of the amount of land that we own, where we had put in the proposal to do all of, including the yellow and the red. And the planning department has approved the yellow, and we are asking to include both.
Thank you.
Any further comments? No?
Through you, Mr. Chair, not a question for the applicants, but I do think it's important to remind committee that the county currently has 2 appeals from the Ontario Municipal Board for decisions similar to this that have been made. Just so you're aware, one of which is on the south side of Mildmay.
Okay. Any further questions? So I guess we have a recommendation here, and we'll see if we can get a mover and seconder. It's recommended that Kevin and Brenda O'Hagan, in care of Martin Cassidy's request for a change of conditions for file B1-17.34 be refused. I get a mover for that. Moved by Paul, seconded by Mitch. Any discussion on it? All in favor? Opposed? That's defeated. So I guess we need a motion to accept it. So I guess the recommendation then would be that Kevin and Brenda O'Hagan and Karen Martin Cassidy's request for a change of conditions for file B1-17.34 be approved. Moved by David, seconded by Robert. Any discussion? All in favor? That's carried. Thank you. Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is an action item for local official plan amendment number 3-17.12 for Weston, and Director Chris is going to present.
A recommendation for approval of official plan amendment number 3.
question, well, I guess we'll get a mover for it. Then there is the recommendation that the Township of Huron Kinloss Official Plan Amendment Number 3 be approved, moved by Milt, or seconded by Mitch. Any discussion? Mitch?
We dealt with this application on Monday night, and council was very pleased in the report that Dana presented, and I did bring up the concerns about taking commercial designation out of circulation, but at the end of the day, this commercial component still sticks with the property. So there's a housing shortage in Lucknow right now. There's not much stock, so providing another residence. There's 3 other residences in this property now. This would make a 4th, but we won't be losing the commercial designation right now. So council was, we approved this.
Did you want to speak, Paul?
So does this amendment just affect this building, or does it affect all other commercial and combination residential buildings in?
Just this building.
Just this building.
Sorry. Just as a comment, I really like the idea of the combined use because because you know if the conditions change and there is an opportunity down there, then we're not forced through this whole process again and subject to the planning process. So there's a variety of reasons. I often think these types of things you should kind of make the decision based on the effects of whatever is going to be in there instead of the particular use of the building. I know it's, but anyways, I do like the recommendation. So, and now, if there's no other questions, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. So the next one is again, it's an action item. It's proposed memorandum of understanding for the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority for planning application review services. And again, the director is going to present.
Quite some time back, around 2015, we started talking about problems with mapping in the countryside, confusion between what the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority does in terms of hazards and natural heritage, questions about where mapping comes from, and so on and so forth. And at that point, we approached the Conservation Authority and said we have an existing agreement with them for what I generally call peer review services or technical review services. And it was a thought. Some of the things that are operational in nature that work well are not really in the agreement and just sort of happen by chance. And other things that don't happen in the agreement need to be explicitly stated in the agreement because they're problematic and causing problems and confusion in terms of who does what. So there was a draft agreement that was prepared by the county and sent to the Conservation Authority back in and around 2015, and there was a couple of meetings that were held with the agreement, and there was a document called Principles of the Agreement. And I think there was general acceptance that the principles the county wanted to see were good and should be implemented. In and around that time, the Board of the Conservation Authority took a bit of a different tact and said, before we start fixing these agreements or devising new agreements, we need to go back at the board level and review our own policies. And so as a result of that, there was about I think about a year and a half or a two-year break where the Conservation Authority went back and drafted what was their new, called their new policies, environmental regulation and policies manual. And this sort of set out roles and functions and responsibilities of the Conservation Authority. There was a feeling that some of the things that the Conservation Authority staff were maybe working on were not mandated by the board. And so they did a whole total review of that. And so that policy came back for review as a courtesy to back to the county and other partners for us to take a look at. And the Bruce County looked at that and reviewed it. Generally a very good and robust document. And at that point sent back a further resolution saying, thank you for the review of the document. Now it's time we get back with the agreement. A couple of months back, we got resent a draft of the agreement, and that significantly altered some of the key concepts of the agreement that we first forwarded to the Conservation Authority. And so the purpose of today's report then is to look at, do a comparison of what we initially asked for in the agreement and what's being proposed back by the Conservation Authority, and then an opportunity for me to make some recommendations in terms of how I feel from a staff perspective we should be moving forward with the agreement. And so I'm not going to go through all the actual details of it. I'll talk about some of the key concepts or principles that they've changed within the agreement. So the first one is the SVCA proposed modification number 1. And what this does is remove, and again, before I start that, again, the general purpose of the agreement is that the Conservation Authority has skills and knowledge in-house in and around areas of natural heritage, flooding hazards, and so on and so forth. And at the county level, we don't have that expertise in-house, so we typically rely upon the conservation authorities to review our applications and provide advice back. And that's charged to the applicant on a case-by-case basis. So that's sort of the context. So in the initial agreement, we asked the Conservation Authority to review natural heritage issues, and these are the values associated with areas, threatened endangered species, wetland values, and so on and so forth. And the reason for the request is, again, we have those policies in our plan, and we don't have ecologists and biologists in-house to do that. And so essentially, under the proposed modification number 1, they've really removed any reference to natural heritage or them undertaking a peer review or technical review of natural heritage issues. And what I find is that the Conservation Authority review of natural heritage can be very valuable. Simply, I would be reluctant to hire another person on staff looking at natural heritage when there's already a number of people in the countryside doing it, and we can get that on a service basis from the Conservation Authority. The other things that people don't often see behind the scenes is they often will have an application, the county plan or the PPS calls for an environmental impact statement, and they look at the property and it's simply not practical given the scope. So in many cases, the Conservation Authority would give us advice saying, is provided the applicant has a building envelope in this location, there's no need for a further EIS. In some cases, there is a need for an EIS on larger developments, and the Conservation Authority can be very helpful in scoping it way down. So they're only looking for the right things that are of concern. And behind the scenes, from an implementation perspective, it's helpful, again, with the cost borne by the applicant. So the staff recommendation is that our original request that recommended the Conservation Authority undertake a review of natural heritage issues be placed back in the agreement are retained within the agreement. So that's recommendation number 1. The second is that the SVCA draft is changed the county draft, and it limits the review area to only those areas that are within regulatory areas, and this is their buffer area or their screening area. And I would argue that that is not particularly helpful. There's many other issues where there's hazardous conditions or natural heritage conditions issues outside of their screening area. And so again, I would argue that we would need a review of those issues on a case-by-case basis, particularly for such things as hazards that have not been identified, and also things such as threatened endangered species habitat, which again are simply not mapped. So recommendation number 2 is the Bruce County staff recommend that the original request by Bruce County Council to undertake a natural hazards assessment for all applications be retained. So significant change number 3 is that under the proposed county agreement, as well as within the existing agreement, all applications are circulated to the Saugeen Valley Conservation Authority for review. And the county does not filter which ones go to them for review. And I find that the established protocol around this works very well. And you may argue that some applications get sent to the Conservation Authority, there's absolutely no issue or no comment coming back, and potentially would seem to be a waste of money. Yet in other cases, for the same fee, an application is submitted and it's complex, and it involves pre-consultation with the Conservation Authority, scoping of EISs, review of the recommendations of the EISs, and so on. It's included in the same fee. So there's some difficulty then, because many of these things are not mapped, there's some difficulty for the county staff to screen them and decide which ones we want to have reviewed in the first instance. And overall, the system allows for a consistent revenue stream based on the number of applications that we process on a yearly basis, as opposed to an arbitrary decision in terms of who gets what. So my recommendation is that idea that they get circulated, all applications in my mind works well. And so we recommend that that be included in the agreement with a standard fee that covers all applications. So the summary of the recommendation is that staff recommend that the process in the existing agreement and the proposed county agreement, whereby all applications are circulated to SVCA, be retained. The fourth proposed change coming back from the Conservation Authority is it was around this idea of a consultation forum. And if you remember back in and around 2015, it was thought one of the major issues in the countryside is lack of communication between the agencies. And furthermore, we have the agreement, but there's no formal place in process to manage the agreement in terms of what works well, tweaking the agreement, communications around the agreement. So the county in the initial draft said there's going to be a consultation forum that's set up with SVCA and county staff so that we meet on some type of a regular basis. And I think the opportunity for that is that if there's nothing discussed, it would be a very short meeting, but potentially, again, allows us to manage the agreement, identify issues as we go, talk about problem applications in a face-by-face type situation. And additionally, down the road, potentially it could be expanded so other agencies and so on are brought in. And it's around this idea coming out of the operational review is we need it's great to send emails back and forth, but we need more of a mechanism that somehow forces communication on a regular basis. So the Conservation Authority is simply recommending that the need for that consultation committee not be mandatory. It just says it may. We may have one. But I think going back to this is one of the key or critical components that I felt was coming from County Council that we needed to have in the agreement. So I would make a recommendation then that the may requirement be removed and the document revert back to a shall requirement, that we shall have a consultation forum put in place. Recommendation number 5, or their proposed recommendation, and this is a big one, and one of the issues we've been running into from an implementation perspective is the Conservation Authority would send us a letter on an application and say this property may or may not be subject to a regulation, and it may or may not be subject to a permit. And that was pretty much not very valuable information for us, because in many cases we're dealing with a small lot. We have a draft site plan in terms of where the building is going to be located, and from a planning perspective, there's no point approving a zoning application or a minor variance application or a consent application unless we know that it's not offending the regulatory line or within the regulatory line are requiring more studies, engineering studies, and so on and so forth. So simply the agreement says that in pre-consultation with county staff, if we ask for a map that shows the regulatory line in relation to the proposed development, that we'll get it. And I think in fairness, in some cases it may be a very steep slope, maybe requires further engineering. All these things we understand, so if the line needs to be conceptual, give or take a certain number of meters, we're very understanding of that, but we need to see the line on the map because it's very difficult to consult with an applicant in terms of whether they should be spending their money moving forward in the absence of that. So that was taken out of the agreement. That needs to be back in. And if that's problematic from the Conservation Authority perspective, then we need to again reevaluate the agreement. So that's number 5, recommendation that within the draft agreement that we require an accurate mapped representation of the regulated line in pre-submission consultation or within the application process, and that be retained. Number 6, Conservation Authority added a clause. It says the SVCA desires and has the expertise to provide plan review and technical review services to the county identified in this MOU, and that the county is relying upon such expertise. The parties acknowledge that the county remains the approval authority for those planning applications for which the county is so designated by statute. So this is simply a clause very valuable that they've added, and I think as we have at the county council level and the local level, this whole idea of interpreting their own policies, applying your own policies, and determining what sufficient compliance with the PPS means these are things that are assigned to local decision-making bodies, and those are the people who are elected. So I think it recognizes that those statutory authorities as being assigned, and they're providing expert advice. And additionally, if there's situations where files go to the board and a conservation authority member is giving evidence either on biology or ecology, that there's an expectation that they're qualified to give opinion evidence within their field of expertise. So we recommend that that clause, as provided, be added to the agreement. Number 7, simply the proposed county memorandum currently states that the amendment may be amended by mutual agreement in writing from time to time. And then no issue with that. The Conservation Authority drafts the following clause. It is intended that this memorandum will be revisited every 5 years by both the SVCA and the county. So again, no issue with that. Simply, we can amend it as we go, as issues pop up, and then undertake a full-blown formal review on a 5-year basis. And I think that's probably a good idea as well. So recommend that clause be added. Next one is the number of housekeeping issues, and thankful for the Conservation Authority for fixing issues regarding wording and so on. Some housekeeping issues that I've included within the final draft that don't affect the, in my opinion, the overall intent or direction of the agreement. And we have endeavored to include some of those changes in the final draft that's being presented. So, a very quick rundown. I think in some sense it brings us it provides clarity on relationships within the agreement a bit better than it did, and some of those things from my perspective I think that need to be in the agreement in terms of review of natural heritage, in terms of that level of expertise, not having that in-house is retained within the agreement. So then the recommendation that I've provided then is simply that we enter into a new MOU for planning services with the SVCA that reflect the 8 recommendations in the staff report. In terms of process, my guess would be then that this draft would go back to the board, and then the board would simply make a decision as whether it be assigned or entered into. The one sticking point may be the requirement that we get a map of the regulated area on a case-by-case basis, or else we're kind of stuck.
Okay. Comments? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, why is the Conservation Authority want these modifications? Why are they presenting them?
I think I can try and answer that. Both Bob and I are on the Conservation Authority, so I've discussed this particular recommendation with the chair. The Conservation Authority, for a number of years, they got into a situation where they were overwhelmed by commenting on things that they have no legal authority to. So we had applications that sat there and there was other issues, management issues, but applications that were beyond a year before you would get Conservation Authority. And so recognizing that that was not acceptable, we went about and drafted this policy manual and said that we will only comment where we have legislative authority or delegated. So through the regulation, through the Section 28 of the Act and the regulation, which is the regulated area that Chris is talking about, and the Conservation Authority through a memorandum, MOU with Ministry of Natural Resources, comments on natural hazards. So Section 3.1 of the provincial policy statement. So the board took the position that said, we are overwhelmed. And first of all, we're not the approval authority on a lot of these where we were commenting on every planning application, and it wasn't unusual to see comments from the Conservation Authority would differ from comments from the approval authority, which the applicants were going, what? It was just too confusing. So, I know it's a long explanation. We're really trying to say we are only going to do where we have a mandate to. I agree this natural heritage issue is one that's I think there's only 2 maps. Kincardine and Southampton has done some natural mapping. And they have commented on natural heritage issues, but almost always it says it's come to our attention that there may be a endangered species there, contact the MNR. So, you know, I don't know where we're going to go with this, because I'm almost certain if it goes back to the board, it's going to, we're not going to like, the board's not going to like some of these recommendations and not going to accept them. So I think, so I think there's a better way of trying to find this. I think we need to get into some kind of a, perhaps the chair of the board and the chair of the committee and the director and can negotiate this. I don't know, because some of these recommendations, the first 3 or 4, I'm not going to support. I just won't support until we really get a clear understanding. It's confusing enough for an applicant. I always say this, and I know it sounds like a buck, but where do I go? I agree with you with the mapping, that mapping for the regulated area. I think the thing to do, because we don't have regulation quality mapping, so we did have a 50-meter buffer in the mapping. You can go to the website and see that area. So it says if you are going to do anything in that area, you need to contact the Conservation Authority to get the accurate mapping. To do all the accurate mapping is just cost prohibitive. So I see no problem with that. I mean, we can, you know, the applicant should say, I know our building inspectors do it routinely when we, in towns where they get building permits to make sure that they're not in the regulated area.
So
I said a lot, but you know, I'm struggling with it, Chris, because
where do we, the legislative authority, you said what you have the legislative authority to?
Just for Section 28, which is the hazard, it's hazard land mapping, and that they have it available. It's where you have natural hazards.
And is that consistent with both conservation authorities?
Yes, yes. Their mapping is consistent. Again, I know, Chris, you raised a couple, but I struggle. There would be very few places, I think, that aren't already mapped in that buffer zone that are recognized as natural hazards. I mean, there'll be some, but they would be very rare.
Yeah, it's just, and again, it's because they have the regulated area, but there's also the zoning bylaw. So potentially there's issues where a property is zoned as hazard, and that's inaccurate. And so some in cases there's potential to remove it, and that way we're trying to get better hazard mapping, but then to do a case-by-case review. I have to really say this, and I think it's important, is that I wasn't aware of the feelings of the board in relation to the agreement. And what I felt, and I think maybe it was a misunderstanding, is that the board in some ways was interested in regulating only what they had authority to regulate. But if there was a municipality who wanted additional services, they would review that on a case-by-case basis. So I'm sort of going under a slightly different understanding, is that if we want something above and beyond, then we would ask. But if there's a feeling from the board that by making the ask that it will complicate the situation and get us back to where we were, I think at this point in time, based on my misunderstanding, we need to go back then and have a fulsome discussion with them in terms of this is problematic. And I will admit we've received the application back. I had a very brief staff meeting with their staff, and they informed me in terms of some of the genesis behind what the board was thinking without having a full understanding of where we're at. So I think I would recommend at this point that we defer approval of it. We have the existing agreement in place. It's no barns are going to burn down as a result of this, and we defer it and have a more fulsome meeting with the Conservation Authority so I can understand their perspective, which I feel I currently don't.
Yeah, I think so, because we're really, you know, I think I've already said it. The board was just trying to make things, I guess, more transparent and more efficient, because we were getting beat up time after time after time. I've had this application there for up to 18 months for very simple things. And again, this is not all as a result of the agreement, yeah, but it was part of the problem, because we were commenting on things that we have no authority for, and, you know, and it was taking up time of staff. And so that was just that understanding. So I agree with you. I think that we need to sit down with and I don't know maybe who all needs to be involved, but I certainly think the chair of the Conservation should be involved in the discussions. Go ahead, Ann.
So if the Saugeen Valley was commenting on things they didn't need to comment on or didn't have authority, then why were they in the, like, who does pay for that then? Just and where do they get the resources if they need comments? So we don't do it, the county doesn't do it, and Saugeen Valley doesn't do it, because Chris was saying you don't have the staff for some of this, or we'd have to hire staff. So where does the person that is trying to get, the applicant, where do they get the expertise for it? That's just where I maybe missed something you said.
Well, and I know I kind of rambled on there, but there's two, natural heritage and natural hazards are in the provincial policy statement. And I think what Chris is talking about is the natural heritage comments is, the Conservation Authority does not have any authority to do that. They just did it. Because the memorandum of understanding was very clear. It only delegated comments to natural hazards. So I don't want to confuse.
Yeah.
And it's very clearly said no other parts of the policy statement. But over the years we've done this. It's kind of, in my mind, it's kind of mission creep where we've gone beyond where we need to be.
So you mean the Conservation Authority has gone beyond?
I think there's some of both ways here, and I think we need to clarify our roles about we're the approval authority for planning applications.
Yeah.
And whatever zone we put on the regulated area, that will always take precedent. I know it would be confusing to an applicant to zone it residential and then go down there and find out, you can't build on it. Mm-hmm. But I think that's very easy to send them down there to start with. And the conservation will identify where that map is. Again, it's text-based, so you have to go out and look at it. Confusing.
Yes, so I'm just confused at who goes out and does that. If the Conservation Authority doesn't do certain things and it's restricted, then who's doing that work? Or is it just work that wasn't necessary anyway?
I won't comment on that.
All right. Well, I'm just trying to get this straight.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps providing an example will help. One that many will remember was we received a response from the Conservation Authority in relation to an application that was close to the jail in Brockton. And they were commenting on the species at risk. So it was duplicating a concern that planning staff already have that authority. County planning staff have that authority, and there was no concern. But as soon as they put it into a formal comment, then county staff have to respond to it. So it was trying to get clarity around those types of examples so that we, as the staff who are providing the service, are not tripping over each other on items, that there was clarity and the work was being done by one person instead of multiple people.
So it's duplication, basically the problem of duplication. Okay.
Mike, the comment you made, I would really like to have this discussion about legislative authority. And I think we all need to, at least I do, I need to understand it better. And Chris, I guess we can do that as part of this review probably, or before we get into approving this document, maybe we need to have that discussion about how far do we go, and Ann's question is a good one as well. I guess if we have the requirement to provide information or on a certain thing, where do we go if how does that work? And this can all be part of the discussion that we could have regarding this issue.
It can be confusing, and I agree with you, Milt. Where you get where you have the legislative or the regulatory, what I call, whatever, you have the responsibility through the law to do something, and where you don't have it,
Yes.
I think needs to be clarified.
Yeah,
that's
and
really,
of course, it's of interest to us right now because,
Yeah.
as Jack can attest, I mean, we're right in the middle of it here, and people are telling us that we don't have the authority to do this, and blah, blah, and I'm not sure. I don't know.
well, that's really, just right there, say, go ahead, Milt.
Well, and I think this document really doesn't clarify because the end user, we're talking about our constituents and developers coming into Bruce County and to do business. I think it has to be simplified where people understand what the authority is for whatever parties involved. And I think too, at the end of the day, whatever this memorandum says or states, that the board of directors for Saugeen Valley makes decisions. Now, not in everyday business, but I think this has to go back to the board, part of this memorandum of understanding. The other thing is timelines. I just heard it again this week, that dealing with Saugeen Valley is, they're going into month 2 now, and they've been told for one of the applications going to be January, the end of January, before they can deal with this. That is unacceptable. So that, and you're right, we as the mayors hear about this all the time. It is frustrating as can be. So I think that has to be streamlined, and it has to be very clear where everybody stands.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments, because that was what the effort of this new MO, this was with the Conservation Authority. And it's not going to be the total answer, I can guarantee you, because there's way too many inputs, or other inputs, but I agree with you. You need to make this very clear for applicants who's responsible for what and where you get the authority to do that stuff. Make me do this or make me do that. Sorry.
So the other conservation authorities, is this an issue with conservation authorities elsewhere, or is it only seems to be a problem with Saugeen Valley? Like, is it an issue with Maitland or you know, some of the other ones close to the city as well? The timelines, the duplication, or is this just a unique problem here?
I can't comment. What I would hear would be just hearsay, but I think we've got a unique problem. Perhaps the board, the authority thought we had a unique problem at Saugeen Valley, and are trying to address it. The reason I asked is I just thought there might be best practices with some of the other, between some of the other counties and conservation authorities that could be looked at, and instead of kind of going around in circles. It's been a long time going around in circles. I don't think to get an MOE, it's not going to be complicated, Chris. It's not going to be difficult either. I don't think at all. I think we can come to an agreement if we understand where each of us are coming from on this and what the So, Paul.
I think Ann kind of touched on what I was thinking, that, so the MOU, we enter into these agreements with various agencies, but, so, do we have that type of working document with the Gray Sauble as a, and if we don't, I'm wondering, why don't we? I guess I believe that the memorandum of understanding that the county develops with a conservation authority should be the same for any conservation authority in Bruce County, which, so we have the Maitland, we have the Gray Sauble. Talking about it, I don't think we should be picking on one over the other, because the one has created some delays over the past few years. I think the memorandum of understandings, and I think another thing we need to understand, Milt, was I believe, maybe I'm not so sure I'm correct at all on that, but I believe the conservation, the Gray Sauble has a memorandum of understanding with your municipality for conservation purposes. Like, you're not a member of the Gray Sauble, but is it not the Gray Sauble you use when you need to?
Which is part of our fee, like, as I understand it, it's part of the fee.
Yeah.
It's a fee that's paid for review of applications.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll just make one more comment. Like, if we want more, I mean, the Conservation Authority, this is our mandate. Anything above that, there's going to be a fee for it, because that's, you know, and so they will provide those services, I suspect. I mean, if we went there and said, well, you take over all our planning, you know, maybe they would. I don't know, you know what I mean? Each one of those would be individual to each municipality. We've got different ones with all through Grey County with municipalities. So whatever we want in it, I'm just saying, this is what the Conservation Authority has said. These items that Chris has raised, let's clarify them. And let's try to come to a common understanding about who's going to do what. And, I mean, we're kind of spinning our wheels here, I think.
Yeah,
but
well, and just a good understanding of.
Yeah.
So is there an MOU with the Grey Sauble Conservation that's similar to this one?
So we have an MOU. The existing MOU covers both the conservation authorities. This is the first one to be updated, just because it seems that this is the one where there was maybe a feeling there's a higher level of disconnect, and so dealing with this one first. In terms of our practice with GSCA, it's very similar in terms of what's in the agreement, so something like this would not come as a big shock or a surprise to the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority when we approach them for, I think, essentially the same agreement. In Northern Bruce Peninsula, it's a little bit different, because the applications, when they come in, it's covered by the agreement that they do a review, but it's not within the Grey Sauble watershed in Northern Bruce Peninsula, so they don't have any regulations in place. And it all sounds very, very crazy when you're trying to figure out who does what, and the fact of it is that the province has assigned these statutory obligations to a number of bodies, including local decision-making people, the conservation authorities. It goes around and around. There's all kinds of duplication. There was a review of the Conservation Authority Act, and we did provide comments back on that. And from the county perspective was that this would be a perfect opportunity to get rid of all this duplication in the countryside. And my problem with trying to bring somebody in-house to do that type of peer review, we have one more person in the countryside now dealing with what is the same issue. And it's just simply, where's the line? Where's the safe place to put the building? That's kind of it in relation to hazards. So when the county had their new plan approved, there was delegated power or exemptions from the minister. And the minister said, we're out of your life in terms of you have the power to approve local plan amendments, and you're exempt from ministerial approval for your own amendments. And with that, and they said, how are you going to review natural heritage issues and hazard? Because they closed all of the field offices. They closed all of the M&R field offices and said we weren't providing that service. So at the time, across the province, the upper tiers were jumping into the conservation authorities saying, under agreement, can you do this for us? So that's sort of the genesis of how it got so complicated in the back of that.
So when does that MOU expire, the Grey Sauble one?
They discontinue.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think there's an expiry date. Yeah.
So is it possible to create something that could be used for both?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
It's just trying to understand the goals of both the county and the conservation.
Yeah.
I'm trying to. That's pretty. So I guess we'll leave it, and I don't know how you want to do it, but I would. Have you got some suggestions?
Through you, Mr. Chair, perhaps just a recommendation to table it so that it sits, and then when staff come back, there will be action taken in the interim.
So a recommendation to table then, I guess. Mitch and Janice, any further discussion on this? All in favor? So it's tabled. So the next item is it's an action item for Bruce. Action item for Bruce County Official Plan, Agricultural and Rural Policy Review, and I believe Jack is going to give a report.
Thank you. And just if I could just introduce just very briefly the background behind this. As you know, we've been struggling to define this idea of the Bruce lens, and we know one thing is where there's a disconnect is around the agricultural policies, and these are the applications that keep on coming back. and some of them are repetitive applications, and also disagreements in terms of sizes of these lots. And then furthermore, the other one that comes up is the size of businesses, or the extent or scope of businesses that should be permitted in the countryside. And so I talked to our staff within the land use planning side. I said, in the very least, as part of this, this seems to be an area of concern. This is something we can tackle as opposed to a full-blown review of the entire plan. We know this is, for the most part, in the urban areas, things are going along pretty good. But in the countryside, here's some issues we need to address. So I asked them to come up with a review of some of those existing policies that could use some work, and also the PPS has now been updated, which puts a bit of a different spin on agriculture in rural areas as well. So, Jack.
So we have a report for today, but to help us sort of follow along together, we kind of put the tables from it into a slideshow. So I'm just going to ask Chris to load those slides, and that'll help us all kind of move through things together. And I think if we go up to the top to begin the slideshow.
You want me to go slideshow?
Excellent. Thank you, Chris. So this is what we're here to talk about today. We'll just get our thing queued up. Maybe if we can go to the next slide, please. This is okay. So Chris provided a bit of an intro. We did initially come to you in March of this year, looking at doing a review of a few sections of the plan, and we, as Chris noted, did get into the Brucelands Action Plan, which took us away from this for a little while. So now we're back, and the focus again is ag and rural policies. So if you go to the next slide, please. The table that we put in our report in terms of a time frame is based on our original proposal from March of this year. We do know that this is a priority for County Council, so we've done what we can to try to condense it, knowing that we're starting a little bit later than we originally planned to. So that kind of covers that. And the other thing we've identified in this is that we'd like to have a preliminary proposed amendment that we can circulate for our for public comments and things like that. And if we don't hear a whole lot back from that when we give a report to you guys, then maybe we would proceed directly into a statutory process with the open house, public meetings, etc. But we recognize that there might be broad public interest, which could lead to a bit more work. So if we look at the next slide, we've noted that we could be back with a public meeting at April of next year if the consultation process runs smoothly, but that if from what we hear back from the public on our initial round of discussions, you guys would like to make further changes or direct further considerations, that we would have to look at that timeline a little bit differently. If we go to the next slide. We did just want to note that some of the hubs have been short-staffed for parts of 2017, and that still is a factor. And there's a planned mat leave starting in 2018. So those are things we're trying to work with as we bring this project forward. If we go to the next one. We do know that we have about $10,000 in our budget for next year. We do anticipate, depending on the number of rounds of newspaper ads, that we may need to be back to ask for some funds out of a OP Updates and Site Guidelines Reserve Fund. So we think there is money to do this, but those are just a couple of notes, and there's one more before we get into it, and that's looking at the policies. Trying to look at the whole plan comprehensively is one approach, but it might be a little bit too much to chew on. And so looking at it in smaller chunks is what we believe to be appropriate. MMAH may have some question there, but we think that we should proceed in this vein, but we just wanted to note that. If we go to the next one. That here is, again, trying to focus on the ag and rural policies. As Chris said, we sat down and reviewed a number of the ones that tend to lead to recurring applications and issues, and there's also some new opportunities in the provincial policy statement. From the tables that we're proposing that we look at today, there's some topics that might have come up at various times that we haven't included, and the reason for that would be that there may be no rationale for a change. We don't have the resources to prepare background information to look at that, or the PPS doesn't support an alternative interpretation. And there's not too many of those, but that's what we're looking at. So we have a recommendation for you, and we put that kind of early in the report because what we're hoping today is that we can talk through a number of different policies and identify some preliminary preferred policy options. We did note if there's to be a decision on that recommendation that we're tables 2 through 5 that we're looking at. I think there was a typo in the report there, so just to make sure that we got that right. And then that we would go out for consultation based on the consultation process that we've outlined and talked about very briefly already. If we go to the next one, so the purpose of the exercise today is to discuss and determine where to take the draft or the plan review and a draft amendment so that we can go out for consultation. The goal that we have is that you folks who are the most familiar with, in some respects, the applications and the issues that you see coming to you, and also as the group that has to make the decision on the amendment, is sort of comfortable with the options and where we want to go. So our thought was to try to review these topics for the time we have available, and we'll leave that to you to determine. I don't want to try to run the show. We want you guys to be in a position to give some preliminary direction where you feel comfortable, and if we need to come back another day, that's okay with us. If we go to the next one. So the first area to look at is the agricultural areas. And the general purpose of having these policies in the plan is to protect and strengthen the agricultural community as a major economic component of the county, protect agricultural lands from intrusion of incompatible uses, commercial and industrial uses that support the ag community, offer supplemental income to farmers, and also to permit home industries and home occupations. So that's sort of bullet points of the objectives or purpose of the ag policies in the plan. And if we go to the next one, one is that it also forms the basis of the rural policies. The rural area just has some additional uses and more flexibility in terms of lot creation. If we go to the next one, so, and actually just skip that one to the next one. So these are tables that we'd put into the report. And so how we structured these tables is to say there's some sections of the plan that we should be looking at. What do the sections do? What are the issues or things we should be talking about? And what are some policy options that we can take? And so what we're looking at is to see if as a committee you're interested in providing some preliminary direction on those options as we go forward. So the first one we identified is MDS. We have a new minimum distance separation guideline that's between livestock facilities and sensitive uses. And the new guidelines in general, they apply wherever they apply, but they have specifically given us some flexibility. And so we're looking to determine what to do with the flexibility that they're offering. One of the ones is that low use or closed cemeteries can now be considered a type A land use. So that would mean a setback to a facility like that would be the same setback as to a house. Right now it's a type B land use, and so it's double that distance. A cemetery is treated the same as a settlement area. Another one is if you have existing lots of record that cannot meet MDS. You might have a small non-farm lot that exists and it doesn't meet MDS to a barn that exists. You have the flexibility to not require MDS in those circumstances to allow a dwelling to be constructed on that lot. We also have flexibility when we are looking now at a new use which is on-farm diversified uses and ag-related uses, whether you want to call those again like a type A land use similar to a house or a type B land use similar to a settlement area. And the difference you might think of in that kind of a situation is something like a machine shop versus a winery. the types of activity that are going on there might be quite different, and so the considerations for MDS might be different. The new MDS also does not require MDS to be applied when you're severing a severing a surplus farm dwelling from, you don't apply the MDS to the barns on adjacent lots. So that one's pretty much a gimme. The options we see here are that we can apply the maximum flexibility that the MDS guideline, the new MDS guideline affords, or we could consider having some addition, restrictions or modifications, or provide more direction in our plan based on what we think would be appropriate circumstances for the county. If there's any opportunities, I guess we'd say it's opportunity for discussion on this at this point, and if people want to provide some preliminary direction, we sort of take some notes, and then we can work from those.
Go ahead, Mitt.
I think the topic we discussed before, the one that we're talking about now, and the next one, the clustering, I think these are all very important discussions they're all intertwined at the end of the day, I think. And I think it needs a day of discussion rather than just trying to fast track this. And I want to commend staff for all the hard work that's gone into these reports. I recognize that, but I also believe for the county moving forward that we as committee need to sit down and spend some quality time with all three of these reports. That's my opinion.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there are a number of items from this morning that are problematic. One in particular is that we still have open the Bruce Lenz idea, and I think it would be in the incorrect order to entertain dealing with the official plan prior to the Bruce Lenz being resolved, because the Bruce Lenz needs to provide guidance in the definition of the official plan and any amendments for the official plan. To Warden Toolan's comments in particular, I would request that it also be suspended or deferred, and that yes, a session for all of it be addressed on its own.
Councillor Eadie.
If you don't mind, I just had a question on the policy, just so I can think about it for the next session. But why wouldn't you allow the maximum flexibility afforded by the new MDS or whatever guidelines, if I can see there, as you know, just what you're thinking there, because I think that's a problem often, is that there's no flexibility, and then you look at a certain situation and you think, well, it's not even ag land, or it's a barn that's hardly used, or whatever. And I know it might be used in the future, etc. But if the MDS have come up with the guidelines, is the flexibility built into the guidelines, or is it a matter of the staff person interpreting them, and the staff people want to know if they're allowed more flexibility? I'm just confused on that one.
Sure. So when you're looking at in these four different types, the guidelines basically say municipalities can call their cemeteries Type A or Type B uses, and they can make up their own list for those things based on their own circumstances. So if you have a high-use cemetery, you might say Type A. So that would be an example. So should the plan provide any, at a high level, before you get to the municipal zoning bylaw, should the plan provide any guidance there? When you have the MDS on existing lots of record, should the plan have any guidance on encouraging the dwelling to be as far from the facility as possible? Should the plan provide any distinction between a machine shop and a brewery in terms of on-farm diversified uses? and then the fourth one I think we would just do. So that would be the opportunity, would be whether, based on the local circumstances, the municipalities wish to have some local policy that provides direction, where the MDS guidelines specifically say you can have your own policy to provide direction on these topics. So that's kind of what we're looking at.
I think just generally to that comment, and I think Kelly really encapsulated, I think the process here, you know, this is, in my mind, how you interpret that thing. This is what the Bruce Lens will tell us. This is what we say. This is how we're going to interpret this in a general sense. And I think that, I agree with you, Kelly, this should proceed, any amendments or any studies to any parts to the policy until we understand where the Bruce Lens will lead us. I think it will lead us to some of these amendments. I certainly do. But it's a big chunk of work, and I think the trouble with this, we've got it here, and it's a big chunk of work, and I think we may need some help, in my mind.
And so the province just for clarification, so the province is okay with each county, like there'll be a Bruce Lens, a Huron County Lens, Simcoe County Lens, and do they support that? That's just what I'm thinking. I'm just kind of confused when it comes to...
Well, the province has their documents, the provincial policy statement and the Planning Act, and we are to have regard for that. It's how we have that regard and how we interpret that and put it into our plans. And, you know, there may be some, you know, wherever we lead with this, there may be some things that the province doesn't agree with, and if that's the case, then we'll resolve that in the process that's available to us. But I think the Bruce Lens is the first thing. We've been sitting on this for quite a while, and because I think it's complicated, it's hard, it's going to be hard to get there. And I agree, but I think we need to start and to see some progress on it. Because we've got these issues that are frustrating for everybody, and we need to be able to deal with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And much along the same line as Anne's question, I guess. So, Jack, the flexibility you refer to, and I say maximum flexibility, just as a point of discussion, the 4 items you have listed there, is that the maximum flexibility, or are there other things that would be included in this discussion? And when we say maximum, I would like to know where that takes us.
So if you...
I think in general, so there's a discussion about the MDS, and we can answer those questions. And what I'm hearing is this is the very first slide, and there's some level of discomfort moving forward with the amendment in the absence of coupling it with, first of all, discussion on the Bruce Lens, and then secondly, how that relates to the policies. So I'm reluctant then to have Jack go through the individual policy discussion at this point, because this is slide one of many.
Yeah.
So my recommendation, and it's been suggested, I think, by the CAO, is that at this point in time, it needs to be deferred pending the discussion, or coupling it with the discussion regarding the Bruce Lens, with the facilitated discussion with all of council.
Okay, so taking that advice, and so where do we go from here then?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my recommendation would be to table this recommendation as you did with the prior one with the MOU. The next report follow the same approach, and then staff will come back in January with action items of how to progress. But I will remind committee that the first discussion on the Bruce Lens occurred in March of 2017.
So we're having further discussion on the Bruce Lens, though?
My advice is
prior to
that...
the recommendations?
I would offer that I actually think we, as an organization, need external resources to progress this further. And if you go through all of the exercise of updating and making amendments to the official plan in the absence of defining what you want the Bruce lens to be, the risk is that the frustrations that everyone has been experiencing will continue, and they'll just be replicated in the absence of having that clarity.
So are you suggesting then that January is going to be the meeting where council discusses the Bruce lens again?
But what I'm recommending is that that committee affords staff the ability to come back in January with a defined action plan of how we will get through what we need to get through, including the items that are on today's agenda and the Bruce lens. And at this point, I would offer that we probably need to bring in an external resource to help us get there.
Just a question, Kelly, just along Mike's comment. I thought Mike was talking about this council having a discussion about the Bruce lens prior to getting into recommendations or... But you're saying the same thing.
That's what she's doing. I think she's...
Okay.
We've really struggled with this, I think. I mean, well, I shouldn't say that. You're right. We've had the first discussion was in March, but it was in that original org review, what, 4.5 years ago, that this was one of the items that we, so.
Yeah.
But I like your suggestion, Kelly's suggestion. Yes, sorry.
And I guess this is a question for Kelly. When we first started talking about the Bruce lens, as you say, was back in March. At that point, were we thinking we would need outside help, or is this something that is developing out of our discussion?
Through you, Mr. Chair, the original, there was a facilitator that was brought in March, but no, at that point there was an expectation and a commitment on the part of staff that this could be completed in-house. Given where we are and we're approaching December, I no longer have that confidence, and I would offer that we do need to utilize additional resources to help us get through the work that will need to be done.
Okay. We've run around. I guess the suggestion then is just, again, a motion to table this recommendation. Milt, Janice, any further discussion? All in favor? That's carried. You want to do the same? Oh, we need the next item on the agenda then is an information item, and it's to do with the recreational bylaw, and Chris is going to present the report.
So this report is for information purposes, and it's in relation to the recreational bylaw, and this applies, the earliest version was the forestry bylaw that we did when we first took over management of the county forest from M&R, and then subsequently the rail trail as well. And currently the situation is we don't have short form wording, or we did not until just recently. So every time there was an infraction, the person had to be taken before a JP. With an information laid, and so on and so forth. So essentially we've taken what's called short form wording to a judge, and they basically approve the short form wording, which allows us to issue tickets for offenses. As you're aware, we don't currently have within the county any formalized bylaw enforcement. I know many municipalities now are looking at a number of private consultants who do enforcement. So in the next number of months, we'll be exploring some of those options in terms of how we actually go out and issue tickets without hiring on by law enforcement at the county level. And so those discussions are underway. So for information purposes, we do have the short form wording and looking forward to issuing tickets in problem areas.
Any questions? I see none. So I guess the next item then, and I think there is an information item, and it's the Project Innovative Cluster Development Strategy.
Yes.
And Nicole?
Go.
Nicole Egan, welcome, Nicole.
Better?
For those of you who have not met Nicole, Nicole is our EDO for sector. And as you know, Vicki is off exploring other opportunities, and Nicole's been gracious enough to step in and take over that portfolio in the interim. Nicole?
Hi, everybody. I speak incredibly quickly, so this should be painless for all of you, but if you need me to slow down, just wave. I haven't put together slides for you. I thought what I would do is just sort of summarize what you have in front of you at a really high level. Effectively, what we're looking at is assessing our existing energy and environmental technology sector, and this is really in line with the sentiments those of you who were at our recent summit would have heard in terms of moving forward a cluster strategy. So it's great to hear that we're on the same page, if not ahead of what everybody else in the region is thinking. But really what I've done here is try to look at how we would break down this project into 4 phases, which are define, discover, deliver, and deploy. No worries. Better? The height, always problematic. I've even got heels on. Sorry, so back to the 4-prong approach. In line with any good consultant in my past brain, I like to outline things in groups of 4 with catchy titles. So what I've done here is look at a define, discover, deliver, and deploy approach, which really means, when we break it down, that we're looking at scoping the project, that's where we are right now, and identifying partners to move forward with so that we can fund a project in a way that's going to be appropriate and equitable and really give a project life for the foreseeable future. So the next phase is really project actualization, and what we wanted to do before we move into that phase is come to all of you and give you a bit of an update on what we're doing so that you have that line of sight. The purpose of the strategy that we're trying to define here is really to serve as a building block to foster entrepreneurial activity, ultimately creating jobs and stimulating economic development. And really, we're looking to position the county as innovative and supportive of entrepreneurs. So we know anecdotally that we have Bruce Power here, and that there's lots of latent talent available within that pool of people, as well as their wives, their families, their spouses, and so on, who we can leverage for more spin-offs, more activity, more entrepreneurial, what's the word I'm looking for? Spin-offs, if you will. And that's what this is about. This is about defining that existing value proposition that we anecdotally already understand, and then looking at identifying and planning to leverage our provincial, national and international incentives and supports that exist for clusters. And then looking at how we, as I mentioned, build and strengthen partnerships with a view to engaging our stakeholders so that we can create something that's long-term sustainable. Part of that process will obviously be assessing our budget requirements. We have some funds earmarked, but we don't know what we don't know, I suppose, at this stage. So we're really looking at early level investigation and how can we engage with both our municipal partners and corporate entities as well. As I mentioned, we're in that phase 1 piece, which is really looking at defining a partnership model, agreeing a project charter, a schedule, and building political support, which brings me here, obviously. Our deliverables out of this phase are really scope, a funding model, and a project plan. So we've done a plan in a really high-level timeline, and really what we're looking at is starting in September past and moving all the way into 2019 for that delivery phase, and then the deployment piece would be thereafter, a short-term, medium, and long-term with implementation check marks and milestone reporting and all of that good stuff that you would expect to see in a strategy such as this. Our phase 2 then, which is the next piece once we actualize and bring together the right partners, is looking at comprehensive research and analysis. So as I said, sort of sanity checking what we already know about the cluster that's sort of organically or with a little push from Bruce Power developing already. Phase 3, that's the piece where we come out with that big strategy and that document that everybody can put their arms around and really embrace as a roadmap to moving things forward. And as I mentioned already, phase 4 is really about how we monitor our action plan and how we track our progress and share that with our stakeholders. So in terms of financial, staffing, and so on considerations, there are funds allocated to 2018 already to move this project forward. And this phase that we're in right now will result in an additional production of a partnership approach that will see more detailed funding and hopefully lots of private interest and investment, whether that's in terms of monetary or in-kind donation remains to be seen. We're being creative in our approach, so stay tuned. And then in terms of our link to strategic goals and elements, we're looking at Goal 7. So this is about stimulating and rewarding innovation and economic development. Questions, comments, concerns?
Thank you, Nicole. Questions? Anne?
Yeah, so I must confess I missed the meeting in September. I think you discussed that then, so I'm just kind of getting up to speed maybe. So where you say, where it says in here somewhere, the land use, zoning, investment readiness within the targeted municipalities, are you referring to all the lower tiers or in Bruce County, or just targeted certain municipalities as a need arises? I was just wondering what you meant by that.
So at this stage, we're looking at the whole county. And I think when we get to a point where we see, let's say, for example, there's a bricks and mortar approach to an innovation hub. At that stage, we'll need to establish where is it going to be. And if it's in one or more than one municipality, we need to look at specifically that area and what those zoning pieces are. At this stage, we don't know where we're going to be. I mean, anecdotally, you hear the proximity to Bruce Power makes sense for a nuclear perspective, but we're widening that here. We're talking about nuclear and environmental technologies. So theoretically, it could be anywhere. And so it is broad to allow for anywhere within the county.
If I could just have one more question on environmental technologies. So environmental just has such a broad meaning.
The idea is clean water, wind, anything that is sustainable in the long term and environmentally friendly kind of falls into that bucket of environmental technologies. Nuclear being a clean energy, depending on how you define that environmental piece, it works. It's really about, I think I've got a, bear with me, I know I did a textbook definition somewhere because it was a question I kept coming back to myself. But effectively, it's about looking at long-term strategies that are sustainable in terms of their environmental support as well.
So are you thinking climate change as well? You know, that type of thing?
I think climate change has to be a factor when you're looking at any sort of technology. And if we're bringing together innovative and really smart people, why wouldn't they look further afield if they have a background and an understanding? I think we're less concerned with what the technologies are and more concerned with bringing together the brains and giving them a space where they can flourish, grow, and encourage that activity across the whole county.
So if the chair will just allow me one more question. So the identification of the services and infrastructure gaps, et cetera, I'm assuming you're collaborating with the lower tiers on that as
we
well.
Absolutely will be.
Yeah. And starting that in this phase, or
as soon as we have updated everybody here, the next phase is that sort of project actualization piece. And yes, so that's talking with each of our municipalities and getting an understanding of what role they can play and the information that they can provide for that research component. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I just wasn't here in September. I was just trying to get up to speed.
Mitch?
So at that conference, the president of the Ontario Nuclear Industry Association, Dr. Ron Orborst, said that Bruce County could be the hub of nuclear in North America. So I know you were there, Nicole. You heard that same comment. So I think that's the type of thing we have to be thinking about around here, that if you've got the industry saying that, we've got a lot of potential.
Any further questions or comments? Thank you very much, then, Nicole.
Thank you.
So that's the end of our agenda. The next meeting will be December the 21st, 2017. I'll take a motion to adjourn. Bob and Janice, all in favor? We're adjourned. Do you get any requests?